Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to use personal stories in your LLM personal statement. When I work with applicants, what I often see is that people fall into two ends of the spectrum. One end of the spectrum is being very formalistic, almost formulaic, and just impersonal in your personal statement. And essentially, a lot of people just use an LLM personal statement as an extended version of the CV. And that does not help the admissions committee achieve their goals because they want to understand what is driving your application, what are your motivations, what do you want to do with this degree. Another end of the spectrum means being uncomfortably personal. Being personal in a way that does not always serve your application. Because the thing is, a personal life story, no matter how poignant, does not necessarily help the admissions committee decide what they need to decide. A personal story needs to work in the context of your application. It needs to work towards the overall goal of the application, which is to explain how you happened to find yourself in a place in your life where you are applying for this degree and how it's going to help you move forward. And so in this video, I'm going to talk about main principles that can help you frame your life story in a way that works for your application and not against it. Let's dive in. Principle number one is that to work with your application, your personal stories need to connect with your professional goals, your professional experience, and your professional life in general. Let me give you an example. A client of mine was applying for an LL.M in environmental law. When we worked on analyzing her background and choosing what to include in a personal statement, we included a story about how she became vegan in the context of her work as an environmental lawyer, and in the context of her application for the LL.M in environmental law, it looked appropriate because, first of all, it showed that her personal values align with her professional values, and it just made her overall application look significantly more credible. Principle number two, and that connects to principle number one, make your personal story relevant to your application. After you've analyzed your background and thought about your life, and why you want to apply, look at the stories that you've collected, at the experiences that are candidates for your LL.M application, and ask yourself, is it relevant to my application? If you just tell a personal story and it is not tied to your application, then it's just going to be information and the admissions committee will not be able to do much with it. Each story you include in your essay, it needs to pass the so what test. Imagine you are sitting on the admissions committee and you're reading something, and I'm going to quote from an essay. You're reading something along the lines, I vividly remember seeing the shadows of two people dressed in black, one pointing a gun at my mother and me, while the other took things we worked so hard to get. Imagine you are a member of the admissions committee and you're reading this. On the one hand, you read about a very dramatic experience that should not have happened to anyone. It's just not okay. And if you're a normal person, and most people on the admissions committee are, you feel a lot of compassion. But you can't do anything with this information because it does not tie to the application. It is not relevant because the admissions committee needs to decide whether to give you a spot or not. That spot depends on how convincing your motivation is, and your motivation has to be tied to your professional life. Principle number three is, if you tell a personal story, it needs to be about you. It cannot be about someone else. It cannot be about someone from a group of people that you want to represent once you get that law degree you are striving for. A story needs to be about you. Something that a lot of LL.M applicants do is that they feel a need to show people who influence them. And that's very understandable. Everybody has been influenced by people, events, books, places. That's understandable. However, in the context of your application, you need to come back to this idea that you're writing for the admissions committee, and the admissions committee is deciding whether to admit you to the program. They need to understand your background and your motivation. For your application, you need to focus on yourself, and you need to frame the experiences as yours. Principle number four is, if you want to include a story from a distant past, it needs to fit one of the exceptions. The most common personal story to tell in an LL.M personal statement is a story from childhood. That's the most popular one. You need to be really careful with those. What I see often is that LL.M applicants tell in their personal statements stories that happened 10 to 15 to 20 years ago. They do this in a way that appears backward looking and don't make an effort to connect that old story to their recent experiences. That also makes an impression that they didn't achieve much since then. It's like in one of those American movies when the main character was popular in high school because they were a quarterback or a cheerleader and they didn't achieve much afterwards. What they do is that they keep coming back to that place in their life when they had a lot going for them. You should avoid that in an LLM personal statement. If you do use an old story, you need to make it fit one of the exceptions. And the primary exception is that you can tell a story from a distant past if it's still relevant or if you needed to explain what happened next. I had a client once who was applying for a JD, not for an LLM. She was an American and she came to me with a personal statement asking for feedback. And the only thing she talked about in her personal statement were the events that happened when she was 12. No matter how much I tried to encourage her to include more, she just was really stuck. I don't know the outcome of her application, but I would be very surprised if she was accepted. Principle number 5 is that what counts is not the struggle, it's the overcoming. Let me explain. Personal stories that applicants talk about in their essays usually relate to adversity, and they relate to obstacles that one had to deal with in their lives. It may sound harsh, but for that story to work and help you succeed, that story needs to focus on how you overcame the adversity. Adversity in and of itself, unfortunately, it's not going to count. When you write your personal statement, think about how you can show the admissions committee that you've overcome whatever you faced and that you emerged as a hero. Because people want to root for people who succeed. From the viewpoint of the admissions committee, they're making an investment in you and they want some sort of guarantee or a proxy. They want some evidence that you can actually do something with your degree, that it's going to actually help you. The way to show them that is to show them how you've overcome the things you've dealt with in the past. These are 5 principles for working with personal stories and LLM personal statements. I really hope it helps. I wish you best of luck.